Well, welcome everyone to this virtual meeting of members of Kensington and Chelsea's Planning Committee. I'm Councillor James Husband, Chairman of the committee, and I'm joined, as usual at meetings, by my fellow committee members. Perhaps just very briefly, we can introduce ourselves. I can see, looking at my screen, Councillor Bennett. Tom, would you like to just say hello?
Yes, good evening everyone.
Great, thank you. And then we've also fellow committee member, Councillor Wala Idris. Wala.
Good evening everyone. Hi, it's Wala Idris here.
Great. And Charles O'Connor, Councillor O'Connor.
Good evening, everyone. Charles O'Connor, Vice Chairman.
Great. Thanks, Charles. Now, I think it may be that Councillor Factual will be able to join us shortly. He's also a member of the Planning Committee. Now, this evening's meeting is a members' briefing about the application for development around South Kensington Underground. It's most important to stress that we are not making any decisions at this meeting, okay? The purpose is for the owners to outline their current proposals and for us to question or seek clarification about what we hear. We are also joined by senior planning officers, including Amanda Reid, the Director of Planning and Place, but this meeting is really about the applicant presenting their scheme. Now, the format will be the following. In a moment or two, the applicant and their advisors will update us with the current stage of their scheme. We will then have questions from members of the Planning Committee. We then move on to questions from local ward members, and actually four ward members have asked to be present and ask questions. And then we should have a good amount of time so that residents' associations and members of the public can also ask questions. We aim to finish really no later than about 8:30, but I think if we all keep our questions fairly concise, to the point, then I think everyone should get a chance to air their views. Finally, if I can just say, please stay on mute with video off unless you're about to speak. Okay. Very good. Well, in that case, perhaps the applicant, if you could just quickly introduce everybody on your team and then go ahead into the presentation that I guess that you've got for us. I see Mr. Poole there. Jim, so do you want to start things off?
Yes, I will. We have quite a team on the call, so I'll give you their names, but that you'll probably forget them instantly. Sorry about that. It's just that we needed to make sure that we have everyone available to answer any specific question that members and residents groups may have. So we have Alistair Nichols and Joe White from Native Land, Scott Anderson and Graham Craig from Transport for London. I think we also might have Adam Herford from Transport for London too. Tracy Meller and Simon Davis from Roger Stirk Harbour Architects. Aris Egling from Alan Baxter, advising on heritage. Charles Noblet, Gardner and Theobald. Alex Wright, Candor, dealing with all matters associated with public consultation and communication. Stephen Friel and Katie Hannon from Gordon Ingram Associates, Daylighting and Sunlighting. Robert Samford of Julian Harrop Architects, who's dealing specifically with the shop fronts along Thurlow Street. Luke Emerton and Claire Booth from my office and DP9. And last but not least, Ollie Balderson from Momentum, who are transport consultants. So you've got a full squad. And yes, we're here to answer any questions as and when they may arise. I will start as soon as Tracy. Tracy, are you driving the presentation? Tracy Mellor
Yes, I
from Stoke Harbour.
I shall share screen.
Thank you, Tracy. Just want to go to the first slide.
Okay.
So we'll endeavour to keep this presentation clear and concise, and we'll try to answer any questions in a similar manner. We will take you through our timeline and offer a brief update on where we are with regard to consultation. Alistair Nichols of Native Land will then provide you with some background on his development company. Then Tracy Mellor of Rogers Stoke Harbour Architects will take you through their proposals step by step, street by street. Next slide, please. Just in terms of timeline, we were asked by Transport for London to tender for the role of joint venture partner in 2017, and in March 2018 we were selected. We then embarked on 18 months of pre-application consultation, and the planning application was lodged in June of last year. In January of this year, a series of amendments were made to the application, and Tracy will shortly take you through those amended proposals. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, the consultation exercise has been extensive. There have been 83 events and meetings, consultation meetings, and we've listened hard and accommodated people's comments and concerns whenever we could. And of course, not everyone will be happy with what they see. However, we hope that even in those circumstances, there is a recognition that our proposals are well considered, carefully crafted, and bring with them numerous wider benefits. Alistair Nichols, over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Good evening, everybody. As TfL's partner, I really would just like to reference two buildings seen here in the centre and to the right of the screen that you might know. The first being our most recent development in this part of the borough on Chelsea Manor Street that we finished in partnership with our partners Grosvenor, which is a mix of private and affordable housing. And on the right is an example of a work that we've done in a conservation area, in the Mayfair Conservation Area on the Pollen Estate, abutting a Grade 1 listed building, where in fact we worked with Tracy and her team, to whom I'm now going to hand over and ask to run through the components of our planning application.
Okay, thank you very much. So, South Kensington Station. Well, I'm sure you're all very familiar with the site, which surrounds South Kensington Station, forming the gateway to some of the most beautiful residential areas of London, and of course the great cultural institutions of Exhibition Road, which attract over 30 million visitors a year. The station itself is overcrowded and in need of upgrading, but that will be addressed as part of the associated station capacity upgrade, which Jim mentioned. However, much of the immediate area that forms our development site is not of the quality of the surrounding neighbourhood, as these pictures show. Having undertaken extensive historical research, we came to understand that this is largely a consequence of the arrival of the railway here in 1868, which saw the destruction of buildings that had occupied Pelham Street, the Bull Nose, and the corner of Thurlow Square. We believe that this redevelopment presents an opportunity to repair that urban fabric by creating a series of buildings that respond in form and massing to their immediate context. Our proposal will reconnect the site to its surrounding streets and squares, allowing the development to sit comfortably in this historic setting. I'll now take you through the 5 elements of our proposal, which, although they share some common language, are individual responses to the different parts of the site. Starting with Thurlow Square. The site on the corner of Thurlow Square is currently occupied by a scaffolding yard. Our proposal is to extend the built form of Thurlow Square to create a new, high-quality residential building. Taking its cues from the architecture of the square itself, the building is the same height and follows the same horizontal datums as the square. We've used the same materials, replicating the brick coloration of the square, and introduced similar deep white window reveals. The upper level is recessed and coloured to reflect the slate tiles of the square's upper story. We're using railings at first and ground floor and have created entrance porticos to reflect those in the buildings beyond. The elegance of the Georgian-style buildings that form Thurlow Square is largely a result of the high quality of materials and detailing, and of course the proportions of the facade. We've worked very hard to create an equivalent level of detail and balance in the design, which does not copy its neighbour, but is very clearly inspired by it and referential to it. Our new building continues the built form of the square at the same scale, reinstating the connection to Pelham Place and repairing the gap created when the buildings here were demolished in the 1860s to make way for the railway cutting. Coming around to Pelham Street, we have a site which is currently a single-sided street. The existing scale varies from the taller buildings at the far end of Malvern Court to 3- and 4-storey terraced houses in the foreground. We're proposing to reinstate the northern side of the street with buildings that are of appropriate scale to those that currently occupy the southern side, illustrated by the red dotted line. Our proposal will also vary in height, reflecting the existing condition, with a 5-storey building proposed opposite Malvern Court, reducing in scale to a 4-storey terrace that forms the majority of the street. The upper storey is heavily recessed to give emphasis to a continuous 3-storey datum relating to the lowest terrace houses opposite, whilst the recessive upper storey reflects the height of the taller houses in the centre of the terrace. The street is terminated at the eastern end by Thurlow Square building, forming a set piece opposite the equivalently scaled terrace end of Pelham Place. The proposal will transform a single-sided street that currently addresses a blank brick wall and scaffold yard into a well-balanced street of a scale and proportion that reflects the existing buildings and which is replicated throughout the area. The proposal has been developed extensively through consultation and was amended to increase the upper storey setback, to introduce vertical breaks, and to change the coloration so that it read as 3 distinct buildings. The material choice reflects the change in colour from the stucco of Pelham Place to the red coloration of the Oxblood building and Malvern Court at the station end of the street. The proposal will deliver 17 high-quality, tenure-blind affordable homes on Pelham Street, carefully considered to provide a range of accommodation, including larger family units and duplexes designed to provide privacy, but also animation to the street. At the western end of Pelham Street, the scale and coloration of the context changes, and so our proposals reflect this. The proposed building steps up a storey opposite the larger form of Malvern Court, providing 4 floors of commercial space over a single level of retail at ground. The extent of this retail has been limited to the station end of the street at the request of residents during consultation. Coming on to the bullnose. The form of our bullnose proposal is clearly derived from the curved form that originated as a wall built in 1868 to protect the open railway tracks and was built over in the form of the current shops in 1914. The height of our proposal is established in response to the other major buildings that address this junction. Through consultation, we reduced the height of our proposal to ensure that it is now lower than all of the surrounding buildings. The horizontal banding of our proposed building follows that of the neighbouring buildings, establishing a base, a middle, and a top of the facade composition, typical of these buildings here seen from the Regency period. The diminutive scale of the single-storey shops that currently occupy the site is completely out of context with the scale of the other buildings that address this major intersection, and consequently makes little contribution to the townscape. The proposed building sits comfortably in its context, clearly responding to the white stucco of the neighbouring buildings. The materials, predominantly stone and glass, have been carefully selected to be of the highest quality and will be crafted with appropriate care to ensure a richness of detail befitting a building of this prominence. Through consultation, the building has developed to have more solidity, has been reduced in height, and now providing 3 storeys of commercial accommodation over retail at ground. The previously proposed restaurant use on the upper floor was also removed at the request of residents during consultation. Much consideration has been given to how the building relates to the adjacent station arcade. The cornice has been aligned, and a deeper architrave panel has been introduced to enable the ornate iron signwork to be continued around the building, reinterpreted as retail signage. This ground level retail continues through to the Thurlow Street building, framing the station portico elegantly between the two buildings. The retail units of the Bullnose will be maintained as multiple small units addressing the street, whilst the arcade units will be refurbished in their current arrangement. The beautiful station buildings remain at the heart of this development, and as such, the station arcade will be restored back to its former glory, with the installation of new shop fronts which will replicate the original curved glass installations, some remnants of which remain. The signage will be redesigned to create an arcade that is as elegant as its surroundings, as was intended in the original George Sharon design. To assist us in this endeavour, Julian Harrop Associates have been employed as heritage architects to oversee the design of all historic elements of the station and the adjacent Thurlow Street building. Thurlow Street. Our proposal here is to retain the facade of the building, restoring and repairing it, and refurbishing the shop fronts in the style of the original. We are adding an additional mansard story, which is in keeping with many of the surrounding buildings. Although not listed, we recognise the townscape contribution that this building makes to the conservation area and wish to retain and enhance it. We are proposing that we rebuild behind the facade, and in doing so, we believe we can have the best of both worlds. We can retain the building's important townscape contribution, whilst providing new, high-quality residential accommodation to comply with all the current environmental and access standards, which the current provision does not. Again, Julian Harrop are working with us to design the replacement shop fronts that will, as closely as possible, replicate the originals, which are still visible at Medici Galleries and De Keys Restaurant. As part of the upgrade and reinstatement of the shop fronts, an additional entrance to the station will be introduced as part of the step-free access provision, providing direct lift access to the ticket hall. And I'll now hand back to Jim to elaborate on this.
Thank you, Tracy. Do you have the next slide? To quickly address step-free access, the development would come forward in two phases. Phase one would be the Thurlow Street building and Pelham Street, and phase two would be Thurlow Square and the Bullnose. The lifts from pavement to ticket hall form part of phase one. Phase two cannot commence until the lifts from the ticket hall to the Circle and District Line platforms are operational. Therefore, work to Thurlow Square and the Bullnose will only happen once step-free access is fully delivered. All of this will be controlled by a Section 106 legal agreement. Our proposal is a critical constituent part for delivering step-free access. Thank you. Just so to conclude the presentation, we'd like to reiterate what we consider to be the key benefits of our proposal. Firstly, as just mentioned, we will deliver step-free access. 35% of all the housing will be affordable. All of this affordable housing will be delivered in the first phase. The ground floor focuses on small shops suitable for the smaller independent retailer. The offices have been designed to be flexible and suit smaller businesses. The architectural approach is well considered and of a high quality, and each building has been specifically designed to fit in, taking reference from their immediate neighbours. And finally, it's been designed to be deliverable. The team have all the necessary skills and experience and are all well versed in delivering projects of this complexity and sensitivity. Thank you for your time.
So, colleagues on the committee, would who would like to go first in terms of questions to the applicant team? Tom, Councillor Bennett. Tom, you go ahead.
Fantastic. Can you hear me okay?
Just about, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Apologies. Tell me, let me try turning off the video. Does that work? Does that
That's
work?
better, actually. Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, firstly, thank you very much for the presentation. I had a question about the bullnose. Well, sort of regards Thurlow Square and the bullnose. I think in the presentation you said with Thurlow Square that whilst it doesn't copy the other houses, the existing houses on the street, the neighbouring houses, it is clearly inspired by them and referential to them, and I can certainly see that in your presentation. Although it is clearly a modern build, there's a lot of similarity and it is clearly inspired by. I was wondering why with the bullnose you went for something which was not so clearly inspired by the neighbouring architecture, and although I do note sort of the alignment of the cornices and the continuation of the iron sign work, I think it's still quite clear that the construction as a whole is much less clearly inspired by neighbouring architecture than is Thurlow Square, and yeah, I was just wondering why that is.
And so, Councillor Husband, in the first instance, if I take these questions and direct them to the appropriate person,
yes,
within
I
the
think
team,
that's a reasonable way to do it. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, I'll go straight back to Tracy.
Okay, thank you. So I think one of the major differences is when you're looking at Thurlow Square, there is a consistent architecture there. It is a square that is a set piece, and you're responding to a particular influence. When you look at the junction at the bullnose, there is a lot of different influences going on there. There isn't a single one. You've got Malvern Court, you've got the large brown brick building with the shops below it. You've then got the curved building opposite. You've got the linear terraces. There are many more influences at play in the context. So we were led very much, the form obviously comes from that form established, which is in the current shops. You see that curved form. The massing very much from, as I explained, the context. And then we tried to create something that we felt had a harmony with the framing of the windows. Proportionally, the floors relate in the proportion of the base, middle and top of the surrounding buildings. It certainly isn't a pastiche of or a copy of, but it's a building that is well considered and would be crafted of high quality, and we feel would sit comfortably. It's clearly of its time, but it bears reference in the materiality and in the proportion to the buildings around it. And we think it would complement what's already a range of buildings on that junction.
Okay, well, thank you for that explanation. No further questions just now, Chair.
Thank you very much. Charles.
Thank you very much. I have a question to the applicants as well. I'd be interested to know about the compliance with the design brief. I understand there was a design brief in, I think, 2016 developed for this site, and I'd like to know how well you feel you've complied with the brief, and hear a bit of the history on that, please. Then a second question, if I may. With the bullnose, it's clearly quite tall relative to the station building next door to it, and I'd be interested to know whether it could be shorter in your view, whether it could in fact be the same height as the old station building next door. And thirdly, I'd like to know a bit more about the proposed materials for the site. And you were talking about high quality materials to match the existing architecture, and I'd like to know what those are in sort of broad terms, please. Thank you.
I will endeavour to answer that question in two parts. The first part I will answer, and the second part will probably go back to Tracy again. So in terms of the development brief, this was a document prepared by TfL in consultation with a large number of residents and residents groups. So everyone on this call, I think, will be familiar with it. It was published in December 2016. I think what we should be also clear of is that is the status of that brief. It's not a planning document. It was a document prepared by TfL to set out a framework for future development of the station. It was intended as a device to assist in the selection of TfL's development partner. The document makes very clear on page 1 that it's not an adopted planning document and that it will need to be interpreted flexibly. And that is what we've done. There are two key areas in my view where we deviate from the guidance offered in the brief. One is the height of the bullnose. The brief referred to one extra story on the bullnose, and you've already seen that that our proposal goes beyond that. And the second is in relation to the Thurlow Street building, which talked about its retention in full. And we have elected to go down the facade retention route with the rooftop extension. So those are our two areas of divergence, for want of a better term. And it's, with regard to your detailed questions with regard to architectural approach, I'll pass back to Tracy.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to share this screen again while I answer that. So the first question was in relation to the height of the bullnose. Inevitably, when you have had a single-storey building there for a long time, any change is going to seem dramatic. I think really, if you look at this view here, the single story of the station arcade is, in a sense, the anomaly. The massing of everything else around it is very much of a larger scale. And we felt that it was more appropriate that this building was of a scale of the other buildings that dominate this intersection here. And that we felt that also its relationship to the Thurlow Street building, this building is also higher, these buildings are higher. It creates an opportunity to almost bookend the station and frame it with the new buildings. So by making these buildings the same height, you create an even setting for that lower station portico. So that's the first one. Second question was about the use of materials. If I just flick through perhaps to the renders. Oh, there we go. So in terms of materials, we're looking at a stone. These are deep stone pillars, very crafted, that give extra space on the street at the ground level by the glazing being set back to them. Set within those are oriel windows, so projected bays, which have a series of stone battens, as it were, held in a frame so that you create these solid panels, but that they're articulated. They have depth and detail to them. At the upper level, those open up, revealing more glazing at the upper level. We initially looked at this being bronze framing because we felt it picked up on some of the colours of the area, the sort of browns and the idea of the darker window frames, but we were asked to lighten it, to soften it. So it picks up now more on the coloration of these frames here. As you come to the lower part of the building, we took our lead very much from the detailing here, the beautiful ornate detailing around the station entrance. So we're introducing there metalwork that will form the signage, but clearly has a relationship here. So this would be bronze work. We've done similar work at Burlington with crafted metalwork for gates and signage. It'd be similar kind of work with the introduction of stone panels again here that relate to the depth of this architrave here. I think that's probably as much as I can say on that.
That's very kind. If I may, just two follow-up questions. What I wanted to know was whether the bullnose could be lower and whether it would be feasible, and whether options have been considered to keep it at the same level as the station building or the same level as the existing buildings. And then on the the materials, it may be a bit premature, but I wondered whether the stone that you refer to is stone that's been shipped halfway across the world at major ecological cost, or whether it's a local stone. Thank you.
So in the order you asked them, we did look at a lot of massing studies on the site here, higher and lower. We felt that the single story doesn't have the prominence or the signalling of arrival, doesn't hold its own on this junction. And actually you say, could it not be the same height as the surrounding buildings? But as I come back to the fact the surrounding buildings are this height, this is the anomaly. The immediately adjacent station portico is lower. We felt it was right to go to the height of the surrounding buildings and frame that station portico. We looked at a story below, we looked at taller, and we felt that taking our cues from these buildings, and when we look at the section, you will see, if I flip back, the heights of these buildings, we're just below the adjacent buildings here and quite substantially below this one. And although we were initially here, which is actually where we felt was right in terms of massing and proportion, we were encouraged to come lower, and so we relate more closely to the Thurlow Street building, which of course you can then see that relationship quite clearly here. On the materials, I would love to think that we could do something locally sourced. We haven't got to that level of detail yet.
Thank you very much. That's it from me for the time being.
Good, thank you, Charles. Wala.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm going to stay with the bullnose because from previous applications, it was an issue, and the issue was the size and the bulk of it. And even though now it came down, well, quite a bit from the last application we saw, it's slightly on the bulky side. Have you considered, maybe because the design makes it so bulky, have you considered maybe to have a design more of a Regency style to keep it, if it's similar to its surrounding, it might not look so big and bulky, because now it seems to be very slightly more modern than everything around it. So that is one question. My second question is, when you say 35 affordable, is that 35 with the whole site, all the buildings, or just the building in Felon Place? These are my two questions. Well, my third question was nicked about the materials. Thank you.
I'll answer the affordable housing question next to give Tracy a breather, and then we'll come back to Tracy on the bullnose point. In terms of affordable housing, 35% of all the housing within the proposal will be affordable. Actually, in just purely numerically, there are 23 homes on the site already, and we are proposing an additional 27. Of those additional 27 homes, 10 are private and 17 are affordable. So if you look at it in that respect, 51% of the new homes are affordable, but interpreting it entirely correctly by reference to your policy, it is 35% of the totality. Tracy?
Thank you.
Hi. Okay, I mean, I think in a sense the question was sort of the previous two questions combined.
Yeah.
The reason that we didn't go for an approach that is more closely following the context in the way we did in Thurlow Square, again, is because there is such a variety of context here. We didn't do a Regency building per se. We don't think that you dignify history by copying it, but try to be respectful to it. We believe that this is a proposal that's born out of its context and that is working to sit comfortably within it. It is clearly modern, but we think that on this junction where there is a range of buildings and a prominence, that it's appropriate that it is a building that respects its neighbours, but also has its own character that is of its place and of its time.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Wallo. Well, that's all helpful. If we can now move on, I think, to the next part of the meeting, and that's where local ward councillors can ask questions. Now, the underground itself, it actually sits in Brompton and Handstown ward, but Courtfield ward is kind of across the road. So it's actually the councillors from both of those wards. A number have registered. I intend to go down. I'm thinking that unless it's better we do otherwise, I'm going to start with Councillor Hammond, then Councillor Marshall, then Councillor McVeigh, and then Councillor Evans. So Greg, Councillor Greg Hammond. Greg, do you want to go ahead when you're ready?
Thank you very much, Chair, and we will be brief because we want to allow plenty of opportunity for our residents. But my question, which may have a brief follow-up, is could the applicants explain what service equipment they envisage to fit to the roofs of the new buildings, please? I think I've interpreted what I've read as being service equipment up there, but I'm not entirely sure about that. So could you go into that detail for me, please?
Sorry, problems with my mute button. I think, Tracy, is that one for you or one for your colleagues?
I think perhaps for our colleagues. I think Simon can probably start that one, and then, if necessary, draw on others.
Yes, hello all. Simon Davis here from Rogers Sturt Harbour Partners. Tracy, would you mind pulling up page 3 of your original presentation?
Sure. Sorry, there'll be a slight delay here while I just get it to it.
Sure.
Councillor Hammond, thank you for your question. I think I can answer that briefly without too much detail, and this hopefully shows it. Each of the buildings has lift access because we have to introduce level access, which is something that at the moment Thurlow Street, for instance, doesn't have. So these are all accessible homes, obviously accessible offices. And as part of that, you have to have a small lift overrun. Now, what we've done is we've minimised those. We're using, they're called machine roomless lifts to minimise those, make those pop-ups as small as they can be. We've also set those away from the streetscape on the station side. And I think if you look at the Robert Taverner report, the Townscape visual impact report, which is part of the application, you'll see that those are not really visible from the streetscape, but they are set back, they're recessive, they're light in coloration, and they're very much of the sort of nature of the other buildings around, where there are sort of pop-ups in the roof, but they're set back and recessive. There are, as part of those, some other small plant areas, but that's the broad overview of the roofscape.
Thank you. So are those all of those plant areas shown on the illustrations, or are you planning to give us another set of illustrations that show them?
Oh no, you have absolutely everything there, and it's worked through in great detail. So that's everything. It's all in the application.
And finally, on the illustrations, are you planning to issue a 50mm lens view of the amended application, because you did that as an addendum for the original application, and I believe the 50mm is the industry standard?
For that one, could I possibly ask Jim Poole or Luke Emerson to talk to that question? It's just they're more qualified than me about the requirements of the application.
You stumped me on that one, Councillor Hammond. I'll need to call on someone else.
I can wait. That's fine.
Councillor Hammond, it's Luke Emerson from DP9. We did provide a 50mm variation document on the previous application. I think there is some discussion as to whether that is actually industry standard. the reference we have is the use of the 24mm lens. We haven't discussed that with officers. There hasn't been a request from officers for an addendum to show the 50mm lens, but we're very happy if officers request that to provide that.
It's certainly something we would hope to see, as 50mm is the naked eye view, and you've changed the application in some ways since the original, so it'd be very good to see it. So let me stop hogging the microphone and pass on to my next colleague, please.
Thank you, Greg. So I think Councillor Marshall, Quentin, you're with us, yeah? Would you like to go next?
I would, thank you, Chairman. And thank you to the applicants for their presentation. Could I ask, despite the quick throwaway remark, that my question would be actually, I'd ask you to confirm that there is actually no link between whether this development goes ahead and the delivery of step-free access. Step-free access, to be clear, means access from the street to the platform on the District, Circle and Piccadilly lines.
Councillor Marshall, Jim Poole from DP9. I hope you can hear me. The application will provide a link between those two entities that you referred to, and just to go back over what we covered in the presentation, and if I didn't make it clear, apologies, because we absolutely want to introduce a legal link between our proposals and step-free access down to platform level. So phase one is the Thurlow Street building and the Pelham Street buildings, followed by phase two, which is the Bullnose and Thurlow Square. And step-free, phase one includes step-free access, lifts from pavement to ticket hall. In turn, we will enter into a Section 106 legal agreement not to start phase two until the lift access from the ticket hall to platform level is provided. Now, that was originally consented under the 2018 consent, which has now been implemented. So it doesn't need to form part of this planning application because it already has planning consent, and provisions can be introduced to link the two by legal agreement, and that is our stated intention.
Thank you. I'm sure members of the committee would have heard you slightly finessed your response, because I didn't hear mention of the Piccadilly line, which is also a very important part of the station. Perhaps are you committing to introduce step-free to the Piccadilly line as part of the legal agreement?
No, so I wasn't intending to finesse. It's District and Circle line.
Thanks. So just to be clear, then there is not step-free actually provided as a result. Thank you for your answers. No further questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Quentin. That's good. If I can now ask Councillor Soph McVeigh. Soph, you're on the line.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, please go ahead.
I have a few questions. The first is, can you please explain what aspects you've included to meet environmental policies like planting, green roofs, and of course the reusing and using the existing buildings in Thurlow Street as part of the circular economy we're all trying to promote? Thank you.
Probably one for Sophie, Tracy or Simon in the first instance.
Simon, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, hello. Hello, Councillor McVeigh. Hi, Simon Davis here. Right, so I'm speaking here on behalf of Sweka, who are our environmental consultant. But what I can confirm that this is a high-performance scheme. We have, right at the start, we got no gas supply at all. So this is all supplied off the electricity grid, and it's run entirely from heat pumps and photovoltaics. So we have a very efficient system. We have green roofs, and we also have blue roofs where we have rainwater delay and harvesting. It's also, where it's possible, we're using natural ventilation. The scheme is in line with the GLA target for 100% reduction in CO2 to zero carbon. 65% is achieved through this scheme, and the remaining through offset. And also, as part of the offices, that's for the residential component. For the offices, we're hitting a 35% reduction with 38% achieved. The target BREEAM for retail is very good, and for office is excellent. So it's a high-performing scheme, and the full detail of that is in the planning application. So if I could refer you to that.
Thank you. You haven't really answered my question about reusing the Thurlow Street, nor about planting in the place, but maybe someone else will come on to that later. Do you have any comments about that?
Well, of course, as a practice, we look at reuse wherever we can. I think that's absolutely vital for carbon, looking at embodied carbon. But in this instance, it was felt on balance that I think, as Tracy described, the building provides a superb townscape benefit. However, the apartments inside are very compromised. They're often of split level, not very well, bad accessibility. The environmental performance of that building is currently very low. And so what we have here is an opportunity to upgrade to very high quality residential use with contemporary access, level access, and environmental performance. So that is the balance, and in that we believe we have the best of both worlds for this site, this important site.
Thank you for answering that.
Okay, thank you, Soph. So finally, of ward councillors, Councillor Janet Evans. Janet.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you for having us here tonight, and thank you to the architects, etc., for being here. You mentioned that this is of its time, but why do you think it is appropriate to use modern architecture and modern materials in this project? This is in the middle of a conservation area, and we had assurances that it would not turn out looking like Fulham Broadway. Can you please confirm that it will not look like that? Thank you.
Jim, should I go ahead?
Please, Tracy. Yeah.
I can absolutely guarantee it will not turn out looking like Fulham Broadway. Although I don't in any way wish to get drawn into commentary on other people's architecture, I think there is a huge difference that the appropriateness of modern architecture in this setting, it's not uncommon to build modern buildings in conservation areas, even as extensions to listed buildings. For example, we did one British Museum extension, a grade 1 listed building in the Bloomsbury Conservation Area, and it was Sterling Price shortlisted. It's not an inappropriate concept, and within the borough there are many good examples of modern architecture within the conservation area. So I think that as a premise isn't in itself a problem. It's doing it the right way, into the right quality and with the right materials. Part of what makes people love old buildings, myself included, is that the detailing, it's the depth of detailing, it's the use of materials, it's the fact that they age well. There are so many modern buildings that are detailed, they're very shallow, they don't have much depth to them because they're often cheaper materials, the detailing is off the shelf, it's not properly considered. So they don't age well, they don't weather well, and they look cheap. And I think there's become an association with some modern architecture that is not of the same quality as older buildings. But absolutely that doesn't need to be the case. Good modern architecture can be used the same quality materials, stone, brick, and it can have the same level of consideration and detailing that gives it that depth of craft and quality to it. And I think that if you take that approach, you can put modern architecture very comfortably against historic buildings or in historic settings. And we feel that that's what we're endeavouring to do here.
Okay, please don't forget your own expression of its time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Janet. Okay, so I think we can now move on to be able to ask members of the public and representative of residents associations to ask questions and perhaps an observation, and then ask for the applicant to comment. Now, I'm guessing quite a lot of hands are going to go up very, very quickly. So if everyone can just bear with me, I've got a list. I think because the councillors actually have been quite, we've all been quite disciplined about not talking too much. I think we're going to have plenty of time to get to everybody. So please just bear with me a little bit if it takes a while to get through everybody who I know would like to speak. I'm going to start with the Thurlow Owners and Leaseholders Association, and I'm going to invite Donna Lancia, who I see your hand is up. So please, would you like to go ahead when you're ready?
Thank you, Chair, and we very much appreciate this opportunity. I have two questions, if I may. Firstly, as of today, 1,844 residents, interested parties, and local businesses have submitted objections referencing massing, inappropriate design for conservation area, and harm to the historic and listed South Kensington Station as reasons for opposing the planning application. Why don't the amendments submitted by Native Land and their architects and others address any of these concerns in a substantive way? That's question one. Question two, you state pile driving, site servicing, and construction work will take place between the hours of 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. on Thurlow Square Bridge and Pelham Street, breaching the RBKC Code of Construction Practice. Please confirm whether this work would take place even though it is in breach of the Code of Construction Practice, and for how many months in total this work would be carried out during those nighttime sleeping hours. Thank you, Chair.
I'll endeavour to answer those questions for you, Donna, dealing with them in turn. We're very much aware of the objections that have been received and the comments that have been made both during the pre-application consultation and during the application itself. And what you may well have experienced, even though it may not be to the full extent of your wishes, is that the proposals have significantly evolved throughout that process. Over the last 2.5, 3 years that we've been involved, we've thought, considered, redesigned, evolved. There are certain things that I think we're always going to disagree on. However, I hope we can agree on certain things about the quality of the architectural approach, maybe. We're working with internationally renowned and recognised architects who think very carefully about the detailing. In terms of the heights, we think the heights are valid in the context of all of their neighbours. And so we think our position on that is reasonable. So we're constantly making judgments about how we can evolve our proposals to address comments, and we recognise that there are a large number of objectors, but there are also supporters out there too who recognise the benefits are coming through this. So we believe that there's a balance here. With regard to your comments on piling and construction, of course, there's work which is going on around an operational station, which brings with it its own very particular set of constraints. I mean, we've prepared a series of construction management plans, for example, 4 in fact for each of the buildings, as well as 4 for each of the buildings, and 1 which is an overarching management plan to set out how the development could proceed. If you want to go down into the absolute detail of that, we would we would need to bring in one of the project managers who's on the line. It's Charles. If you would like to do that now, we're happy to do that. I'll take advice from the chair.
Yes, I think that would be helpful, actually. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to bring in Charles from Gardner Theobald.
Thanks, Jim. I think it's worth saying, before anything, above all, we'll clearly be agreeing a construction management plan with RBKC before any works commence, and clearly we'll do everything possible not to undertake works during night time, where clearly it's necessary, and that may be due to TfL constraints. Obviously, with a live station around us, there may be elements of work, structural elements of work that may need to be undertaken, and as I say, that will have to be agreed with RBKC and TfL in advance.
Okay. Donna, did you have any follow-up that you'd like to make on that?
No, just we would like to see greater detail, because obviously residents do need to sleep, and that you will be building over a active tube station. So yes, we would love to see more detail on exactly this topic. Thank you.
I would. Yeah. Do you mind if I just follow up on that?
Just
because very quickly, because we have prepared these draft plans as an indication, but that they would also be covered should planning permission be granted by condition, and it would be in the gift of the planning committee and officers to refer those management plans directly back to residents for consultation.
And how many months will this drilling be taking place during these hours? Can you give us that information? And then I'll pass to my other resident association colleagues.
I cannot, but I wonder whether Charles can answer that question.
Yes, that is a critical question, please.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, I think we've looked at kind of the nature of the work that really will be required. As I say, much of this will need discussion and agreement with RBKC and TfL. It's worth saying that. There are elements that may be needed. We're potentially looking at a period of approximately 6 to 9 months to undertake the piling works within the station. But as I said before, everything will be done to undertake those works during daytime hours, so noisy works during daytime hours as much as possible. As I say, that is worst case scenario, but it's likely that we can agree with TfL that certain specific works related to the structural works, particularly in the deck, can be done during daytime hours as opposed to nighttime hours.
Okay, I realize others have questions, so.
Okay,
thank you.
No, that's helpful. Thank you so much. I'd like to now invite the Onslow Neighbourhood Association, and I think Susanna Torstoff, I think you're with us. Would you like to pose a question? Please go ahead when you're ready.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I have actually 3 questions, and I would like to go one by one if that's possible. I really appreciate the commentary that you intend to provide visuals with a 50mm lens for this amendment. It would be great if these would be really 50mm lens and not 25mm lens cropped into 50mm as before. But that's only a side note. One thing I wanted to clarify is the visuals we just seen, as well as the visuals used in the townscape and design and access statements, I believe are only 24mm lens. Which is a bit distortive because the human eye would have a totally different view with buildings, large buildings looking much smaller and further away than they would be in reality. So could you please confirm that your material where you do the assessment doesn't include 50mm lens
views?
Simon Davis, probably one for you, unless you decline.
No, I don't. Well, I don't decline, but I think I'm going to answer this again with Luke, who's more expert on this. But I mean, what I'd say is that we understand the visuals we've used, and Robert Taverner, in his report, I mean, he's incredibly experienced and a brilliant townscape advisor, and I believe that we've shown something that's entirely representative of what will be evident. Now, in terms of the detail of what's been submitted, I wonder, Luke, if you could just reiterate what you said, because there has been discussion over this with the borough, and we're certainly able to provide everything that's required for this. So maybe, Luke, you could just fill in a bit more detail.
Yeah, sorry, Simon, absolutely. I mean, there is we don't necessarily need to go into the too much detail, but we are happy to provide the 50mm lenses. We do think it does create a more of a cropped view. The field of vision, the human eye field of vision, is obviously much wider than anything that can be necessarily captured on a film or in a visual. But we haven't used any kind of fisheye lenses. We haven't used any distorted imagery for the townscape visual impact assessment. We have used it on the smaller lens, but as I said earlier, we're happy to provide the 50mm lens views for you.
Yeah, I think just to try and add to that, Susanna, we're following what is widely considered as an industry standard approach. I know other people take a different view on that, and rather than stand here and debate that, we will undertake to do alternative views in a manner that you describe, because I don't think you're going to be persuaded of the industry standard.
Well, the industry standard under my guidance from consultants is with the Landscape Institute September 2019 guidance, which clearly outlines the 50mm lens, but let's not debate on it. But I think, one of the questions which I asked is basically the material where you do the assessment, the townscape assessment with the pictures, as well as the design and access statement, where some of the views which we've shown here, those are with 24mm lenses. Can you confirm that, please? Which is a wide angle lens, which is not.
My understanding, Susanna, is that we've used the technical note is a 24 to 35mm lens in a 35mm film format. That is a wider angled lens. It's not a fisheye lens. It is a wider angled lens because it captures the field of vision it's a wider field of vision that it captures than if you use a 50mm lens. But it is, you are correct, it is a slightly wider angled lens.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can you put up the ground floor plan revised drawing, which was 2468927? And I'll ask my question because it's all about the public realm. Is that possible? If not, I'll ask my question like
this. Sorry, apologies. What was the number reference you just gave?
2468927. It's the revised ground floor plan drawing, which basically shows the ground floor across, from Thurlow Street all down to the south of the station.
Okay, maybe go ahead and ask your question and I'll try and pull it up. We had asked that Simon Davis also had access to present because he had all the drawings set up, but I'll try and find it to set up while you ask your question.
Okay, I have it, I think, if I could present. I don't know if that's possible, Chair, for me to have.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, of course. If you can locate the drawing that is being referred to, then that would be great.
Just at the moment, it says only meeting organisers and presenters can share. So
okay.
Right.
Well, let's go. Basically, what it shows and why it's so important. I'll run you through it then a little bit longer on the verbal side.
Hang on, I might be able to share it.
Oh,
Is this the one?
Sorry, Chairman, I've made Mr. Davis presenter now.
Oh, great, thank you.
I think I'm.
All right.
Excellent.
Is that drawing you?
Yeah, exactly. But if you can upsize it a bit, because this is a bit more.
Quite small.
Perfect. It's excellent. Yeah,
that's good.
Thank you
Very
so
good.
much.
Okay.
So my question to you is, there is something which is called, for those who are not familiar with it, a pedestrian level of comfort analysis. So my question is, why is your pedestrian level of comfort analysis not assessing any of the current or post-development restricted footpath locations? Now, for those who are not really familiar with this comes within the transport assessment. And the reason why this is very important is there is a material reduction in the public realm. North of the station, you will have additional 25 cycle stands, which you partially can see here. They are within exactly. There are existing ones already, and there will be further more of them. South of the station in the plaza, you will have a loading bay, if you can show that with your hand, exactly. And you will have additional 55 cycle stands, which are next to the loading bay as well as on the other side. And there is also a flower stand standing, which is this one. But may I say that this flower stand really doesn't reflect the size what the stand really has. Because, you know, it's not only the stand, it uses also material part around the, let's call it the container. So this is a little bit, you know, sort of showing a very small, much smaller amount than what it is. So I'm coming back to my question because you might have forgotten about it. So the pedestrian level comfort analysis hasn't been done and hasn't been looking at the areas where basically the public realm of the location is reduced, such as, for example, if you go to the loading bay and exactly where you had before, the passage into Pelham Street, there are the cycle stands and there is a materially reduced passage. Likewise, if you go more towards the round part of the bullnose, you have already there, yeah, there you have also a smaller part. Now I've lost you. Okay, and then also north of the station, you have people coming out of the arcade, going right to the left. The passenger flows to the bus stops. There are 3 bus stops for 6 major routes, and it is an extremely busy flow of passengers there. And so we really hope that this is looked at in detail, because we believe there is a grave health and safety issue, and we've outlined that in one of our reports.
Susanna, your point is noted and understood. We have Ollie Balderson from Momentum Highways Consultants. Ollie should be on this call, and Ollie will be the best person to endeavour to answer your question.
Thanks, Jim, and hi, Susanna. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as Jim said, I'm Ollie Balderson from Momentum Transport Consultancy. On the pedestrian comfort level analysis, we've produced a full pedestrian comfort level analysis for the surrounding footways, and that includes Thurlow Street, the Bullnose, and Pelham Street. It's been assessed in line with Transport for London technical guidance, and the transport assessment includes in the appendix a quite detailed routing assessment just for full transparency of the methodology. I'll take each of your locations in turn if that's okay. So I'll start with Thurlow Street. On Thurlow Street, your point is noted that with delivery vehicles there between the hours of 7 and 10 in the morning, which is when they're allowed, and also with cycle stands, and there are in addition a few pieces of street furniture like bollards. They take the width of that footway from what it looks like 14 meters down to 8.35 in the morning peak and 11.4 meters in the evening. So we've assessed a pedestrian comfort level there for a scenario where there is a delivery vehicle in place. And what we found is that it still comes out with a comfortable, what's in TfL language, a comfortable level of comfort for pedestrians. And that's really just by virtue of it being a very wide space, even if there are delivery vans there. So at that position, we're quite comfortable that there's, by quite a considerable margin, significant, like a substantial width for pedestrians. At the bullnose, this has been an area of design focus between Momentum and RSHP and all of the applicant team, because we appreciate it appears to be quite a pinch. So some design features there have been implemented to mitigate any potential risk, and those are really stepping in shop fronts. So that allows pedestrians to stop and step into those setbacks without impeding on pedestrian flow. So that's quite an important improvement to the existing situation. Again, we've done a detailed pedestrian analysis there using this pedestrian comfort level tool, and again using our development scenario for the morning and evening peaks, it comes out as comfortable. So at that point, it's not negatively impacted in the pedestrian comfort level language by the development proposals. On Pelham Street, I think where you're talking about specifically, Susanna, is the this area where the cursor is around the loading bay. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, it is actually also the whole of the space of the space, that specific part, as well as the whole plaza, because I think my view is, or I think because of the flower stand, that what we see here is not really reflective of what we will see afterwards, because the flower stand is actually double, if not triple the size in terms of its occupation. And the loading bay and the cycle stands at the entrance of Pelham Street, you can see it already now that it is quite, let's say, cluttered. And then if someone wants to go out of the station and go to Melbourne Court, because there's a crossing, you know, they need to navigate between cycle stands, flower stall, and loading bay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the first thing to note is that the proposed new loading bay is, I think, overall will improve the highway safety by taking vehicles that currently load informally and formalising that operation off street. That being said, there will be some changes, as you have identified, to cycle bays and the like, which will need to be designed through post-planning. So don't necessarily have all of the detailed answers there, but we're confident that highway safety and pedestrian comfort won't be negatively impacted at that point. On the whole of the Pelham Street Northern Footway, again, we've treated it to the same pedestrian comfort level analysis, and we're also confident that in the baseline scenario, which is based on our surveys in 2019, and a future baseline and a development scenario, in all of those, we score either A+ or A minus in the pedestrian comfort level. And apologies,
Oliver, thank you for that. I think I'm going to have to. I think I'll need to stop you there, because I think we need to move on, because there are quite a few people who'd like to ask further questions. So I want to bring other people in, but thank you for that, and thank you, Susanna, for posing those questions. Can I move now and ask Mr. Nicholas Gould? Nicholas, I think I see you on the line. Please, when you're ready, if you would like to ask a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 or 3 questions. DP9 mentioned in answer to a councillor that the current proposals depart from the 2016 ones in 2 respects, being Thurlow Street and the height of the bullnose. My question is it correct that the current proposals also depart from the 2016 development brief by providing a large residential block on Thurlow Bridge, which was not there in 2016, and also in the height of the proposed development along Pelham Street. Chair, would you like me to go and put my other questions or pause there?
I tell you what, put the couple of other questions, and then I think the applicant team can address them all at the same time. So I'm keen to make sure everyone gets a chance to in on the conversation. So
yes,
please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Number 2, your daylight sunlight report identifies 16 existing homes on Pelham Street that will be so severely impacted by the development that they will not meet the Building Research Establishment's guidelines. My question is, what will you do to prevent this loss of sunlight and daylight to those homes? My last question, I think it reinforces what has already been said about the loading bay. It is your proposals introduce a large loading bay servicing 2 office blocks, which haven't been there before, and a number of retail units into a pedestrian plaza immediately next to the entrance to one of the busiest underground stations in London. How can that be done safely? Thank you, Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
So Nicholas, Jim Poole of DP9 here. I talked about substantive deviations from the development brief when I was talking about the 2 areas that I did. I also mentioned the flexibility within the document and the flexibility within which it's due to be interpreted. We feel that what we're doing, what we're proposing, is within the spirit of that flexibility, and some diagrams which Tracy showed earlier in the presentation drew some comparisons between existing massing on the south side of Pelham Street and the proposed massing on the north side of Pelham Street. And I wonder whether we could use that as a guide, if that would help. Tracy, can you assist in that regard?
Yeah, just bringing you up now. Hang on. There we go. And sharing.
Thank you.
Can you see that?
Not yet. Yes. So what we see here are the dotted red line, and it's not the easiest to follow, I must admit, but the dotted red line reflects the building heights on the south side of Pelham Street, and you can see in the shaded tones our proposals. And so the judgment that the architectural team made was that the building heights closely relate to the buildings opposite, in fact are significantly shorter in the instance of Morgan Court. And there are a series of setback levels. There's a setback level on the lower elements of Pelham Street. So we feel that that was a reasonable interpretation of the development brief, notwithstanding its planning status or otherwise. With regard to daylighting and sunlighting, as you will have seen, we've undertaken some very detailed testing in that regard. And of course, when developing or redeveloping what is in part of in daylight terms, you would consider it to be a vacant site because of its effectively low-rise nature. The impacts can create a disproportionate percentage change. For example, any development on Pelham Street that matches the height of the existing buildings will deviate from the BRE guidance. However, even taking that into account, 90% of all the windows and rooms tested will meet the daylight standards and 99% meet the sunlight standards. And you are correct, there are rooms which technically fail along Pelham Street, but they will still retain high levels of retained light, and that is the nature of the advice that we have received from our daylighting and sunlighting advisors. I hope that answers your question.
On the loading bay, should Ollie respond again?
Yes, Ollie should come in on the loading bay.
Thank you. So I think just to keep this brief, the first point on the loading bay is that we understand there are quite a number of existing informal loading operations that happen around that near corner on Pelham Street, that this formal loading bay would take away from the active highway. So I think there's an element there which the loading bay would introduce improved highway flow and safety for that. Clearly, there's a pedestrian desire line to the crossing, which would need to be slightly tweaked in its location in order to be as attractive and as clear to pedestrians in the eye line leaving the station's southern access. So that's it's something that we feel we can confidently design to be both safe for pedestrians, cyclists and other road users, and that the details would be worked through with RBKC at the post-planning stage.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a follow-up.
No. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed for those questions. Can I turn now to Emily Candler, and I think you are representative of the Exhibition Road cultural group. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Please.
Hello. Thank you.
Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you for that. So the Exhibition Road Cultural Group, for those who don't know, is a partnership of 20 arts and science organisations in and around South Kensington. And these are organisations that are connected by more than a shared geography and a shared history. They've got a shared mission to promote innovation and learning and inspiration in the arts and sciences, and to be a centre of debate and to bring people together. And being open and accessible is absolutely core to their purpose. It's so much more than a nice day out. It's about inspiring and challenging future generations. So I wanted to ask about the step-free access. All of our buildings have invested in making their buildings accessible, but the station absolutely lets down our visitors as the gateway to the cultural district. So that we've been supporting, the Exhibition Road Cultural Group supports the application, and our individual institutions have written to support the application on the basis that it delivers step-free access. Could you give us a bit more explanation about how that step-free access is going to be guaranteed and delivered by this scheme? That's one question. I just also wanted to ask another question about timing. Just had a briefing today from Visit Britain telling us that they're not expecting inbound travel numbers to recover before 2025. Now, our visitor numbers are about 50% international at the moment. So is there an opportunity or an advantage in getting on with and delivering the step-free access work while the passenger numbers are lower? And can it be delivered sooner than 2025? I think it's 50 years since the lifts were taken out and 30 years since we've been discussing plans to develop the station. So yeah, there's a question on timing and a question on how will step-free access be delivered. And then finally, if there's anything more you can tell me about how it will benefit the visitors and the staff and students and the local community, I'd love to know.
So thank you very much, Emily, for your question, which we'll answer in two parts. I tried to answer the question when I was queried by councillors about this point, and I think there is a degree of concern that if planning permission is granted, step-free access to the district and circle lines will not follow. That is entirely not our intention. We are completely committed to delivering step-free access, and the way that we are seeking to demonstrate that commitment is through the phasing, whereas phase one, Thurlow Street and Pelham Street, is the first phase. Well, Thurlow Street is in effect re-providing the amount of residential that is there, and Pelham Street is providing the affordable housing which comes with it. So it's delivering So the lowest impact and the sort of the lowest financial gain, frankly, as part of phase one, and the phase two, Thurlow Square and Bullnose follows, and only when we have done step-free access and when we have delivered step-free access through our proposal and the 2018 consent, can we commence phase two. We are willing to enter into a legal obligation linking the lift access in the manner described. So it's a strong commitment. We are very confident that it's been delivered. We wouldn't have made these commitments if we didn't think we could do it. So I hope that offers some assurance in that regard. With regard to timing, yes, we would like to get on with things, as you might imagine, and yes, there feels like there's a if you can use the term, a window of opportunity, which is as a consequence of what we're all going through at the moment, which no one is enjoying for all sorts of reasons. However, just in terms of funding and delivery, I mean, it's obvious that TfL is suffering severe capital constraints. That will come as no surprise to anyone. But in that regard, they need things like a planning permission for this site in order to give them confidence that every aspect of step-free access should be funded and then delivered. So they've probably got one eye on the outcome of this meeting and one eye on the outcome of any subsequent planning committee meeting. But I know that everyone that we work with and the people we work with from TfL are committed to doing it. That's probably the most I can say at the moment with regard to those commitments, but we're willing to enter into a legally binding commitment to make this happen. With regard to the wider scheme benefits and the sense of arrival, I believe the benefits are manifest, but I think it's probably up to Tracy and her team to seek to describe that in a bit more detail, if that would help.
Okay, I can step in on that. I mean, I think absolutely right. This is, in a sense, the station has a dual purpose here, because it is, of course, for many people who live there, it's their route home, it's their local station. But for 34 million people a year, it's also the gateway to the cultural quarter of London. So it absolutely needs to have a renewed sense of arrival and be of a quality of that destination. And key to that is, of course, the accessibility issue. You know, we've all seen the work that's been done at the various institutions. When you go through the tunnel, there's a facility there to go into step-free access, but of course it's not at the other end. So absolutely, we appreciate that. I think that a lot of work has been done to upgrade the area between the museum quarter and the station. And in a sense, it's a continuation of that good work, in that the station will then have the sense of arrival that it should have, and an easier natural flow up to the exhibition quarter. And of course, for staff, hopefully, the frustrations of all this is not great about South Kent Station when it's overcrowded and congested will make their daily journey much better. And anyone who's been there at half term with the influx of buggies and the like will know that it's very difficult in terms of getting up to the museums. So yeah, absolutely, multiple benefits, I think.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I'd now like to turn to the Brompton Association, and I think Sophie Andrea would like to pose a question. Hi, good evening. Hi, thank you for waiting.
No problem at all. Thank you very much indeed. Can
you just, we can't hear you, I think. Yeah, that's better. Yes, yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, no, thank you very much indeed for the presentation and so forth. The question I particularly wanted to ask relates to we heard a lot about how the Bullnose and its the proposed height of the new building is supposed to echo buildings around it, and that it was pointed out that the arcade, which of course is the key listed element, of course the whole Bullnose is actually listed, was described, I think, as an anomaly in terms of its height. And I think it's really a question around that, really, because this is really the key point, that we're dealing here with with a listed site and the very centrepiece of a major conservation area. And of course, when George Sherin designed that arcade, what we've discovered is he retained the west wall of the original booking hall, which is still there, buried and covered by, at the moment, the building's on the bullnose. And all the drawings that I've seen, you know, this wall, which is hugely important. We have to remember that South Kensington Station was one of the earliest tube stations in the world. It was, you know, that particular line was the earliest tube station in the world. And yet the importance of this survival within the building just doesn't seem to be recognised. But equally, as I say, the question is, why are we treating the listed arcade as an anomaly? I mean, surely, you know, it's the setting of that listed arcade and its height, and it's the small scale of that arcade, the views across that small scale bullnose, the centre of the conservation area. I mean, this is really what is key to the character and the village quality of South Kensington.
So, Sophie, Jim Poole here. Thank you for your question. I think we might answer that in two parts, if that's okay. Maybe Alice from Alan Baxter's, if you start, would you mind dealing with matters of heritage, and then maybe Tracy weave in your response around Alice's comments.
Sure.
Sure, thank you, Sophie. I think when Tracy was talking about the anomaly of the station, she was talking about it in terms specifically about a question about scale. So perhaps, Tracy, you can pick up on that a little bit later. Also, Tracy, I think it's probably worth talking about how you've responded to that particular wall that you're talking about, Sophie. If anybody else isn't aware of it, it's the western wall of the original Victorian station, which survives to a certain degree. Thank you. You're just bringing it up there now. You are correct, Sophie. The bullnose is curtilage listed, so it benefits from a technicality, whereas it's physically attached to the architecturally and historically significant station. It's covered by curtilage listing. So it's not part of the listing of the station. It's not recognised by Historic England as being part of the significant part of the station, but it is, as a technicality, physically attached to that station, therefore is covered by curtilage listing. We've assessed that.
When the listing was actually done, that wall was not known about.
Not the wall, we're talking about bullnose now specifically. So we've assessed significance. We've talked about the application being heritage led, and in that what we mean is that the very first thing that we've done, TfL did, and then Native Land, was to understand the significance of the buildings and their setting around the station. Then once we've understood that significance, to inform the design and come up with a design that's rooted in place and that responds to what's there. So it's really about responding to the context of the station. The bullnose itself, I think it might be fair to say, I've been inside that building, I've had a look at it. It benefits from that technical curtilage listing. If it weren't attached to a historically or architecturally significant building, it wouldn't be ascribed very much value in terms of architecture or its historic interest at all. What's significant about the bullnose is that rather familiar shape, how it responds to that junction. That's what we've recognised to be significant, and I think we've been consistent in that even prior perhaps to Native Land's involvement back when TfL were looking at the original station upgrade. What's significant about that bullnose is the shape of it, how that responds to context around it, and the historic form of what was the village of Brompton, that curve. I think we've been quite open about saying that that's the limited significance that we ascribe to that, and that the actual fabric of the buildings themselves, its scale in and of itself, isn't of architectural or historic significance. And so a development that maintains that bullnose shape, even if it loses the fabric of those shops, which aren't particularly significant, that is retaining what's significant about the bullnose in and of itself. Does that answer your question about the bullnose, or at least put our view forward about the bullnose?
It certainly puts your view forward, yes.
We can agree on that. Tracy, is it worth talking about how you've responded to that remnant Victorian wall, which has been considered, and the scheme involves two connections through that wall?
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So the wall sits in, actually, Simon, you're in control. Yeah, thank you. In this line here, which Simon's illustrating. And it can only at the moment be seen from the roof of the building. You can look down onto it. So what we've looked into it, and there's some arches in it. And the two openings that we proposed actually go through the bricked up arches of the wall. We're proposing that we retain the wall. And in fact, our core, which is the piece, the stairs and the lifts that provide access to our building, have to do some structural gymnastics to get over that. So we're actually stepping the core between ground and the above levels to ensure that it doesn't impact on that wall. It steps out over it, effectively cantilevers over it, to ensure that that wall is kept intact.
In fact, Sophie, it's Simon here. It's fair to say that following, you brought this to our attention. We have actually this whole part of the building is set out with that in mind. So that was the defining point. That wall is entirely retained. With carefully, as Tracy says, we'd set these out so they're just within the arches in the wall. These two openings.
So in fact, there would be more of a sense of the existence of that wall than there currently is, which is completely concealed unless you find yourself on the roof of the bullnose.
So where would you see it?
No, I'm not saying you make it visible, but the fact that you're walking through the arches of it, there may be some way of celebrating the fact that there's an awareness that it exists and that you're able to pass through it, whereas at the moment there is no sense of awareness of it.
No, there isn't, but now we know it's there. I think my question is about, given the importance of this listed arcade, the discovery of this really important survival from the first era of underground development in the world. It's just curious that so little. I mean, in other words, your new building, has pressed ahead regardless of that. Of course, the other thing I would just add is that because of the shape of your new building and its design, it actually takes out the listed curved shop fronts to the north and partly to the south of the station, but particularly to the north on both sides. And of course, the new exit from the booking hall to Thurlow Street is now exiting, contrary to the 2018 permitted scheme, which had an exit coming through the unlisted Thurlow Street block. But actually, the current proposal takes out one of George Sherrin's, if not two of the listed shop fronts. As I say, you had a permission to have an exit from the station into Thurlow Street through one of the shop units in Thurlow Street, but this current proposal has shifted that further west. So really, all of this, it's all sort of curtailing the actual listed and damaging actually the historic fabric of the listed arcade.
I think we feel though that there's I would hope you agree. There's a huge benefit in the very, very careful work that Julian Harrop architects are doing to restore and bring the arcade back to its original glory. So we feel there's a huge benefit in what's being done. In the
2016 brief, that was always the intention. I'm just saying that actually the bits are being lopped off the listed arcade purely to create the new building on the Bullnose, and as I say, to move the exit from the booking hall, which seems unnecessary.
It's worth just remembering, for those that aren't aware, there is a listed, well, as I'm sure you're all aware, it's there, but the subway beneath is also listed. So I think there's been very careful collaboration between the different architects working on that entrance to make sure that it has as minimal impact to historic fabric as possible. So obviously it's got to land well at the street level, which I'm sure the architects can talk about, but it's also got to wind its way through the remnants, which is now effectively the foundations, Victorian foundations of the station and the subway. So it has to be in a position where it balances both the benefit of having step-free access and the benefit of minimising harm to all of the listed assets, including the subway.
Given to create that and that exit, within part of the Thurlow Street block, and the reason for moving it is presumably so that by facading the Thurlow Street block, you can create a vast retail basement underneath, effectively, most of the Thurlow Street block, which is obviously not there at the moment. So it doesn't seem to me to be. The question is it really of where's the public benefit here of shifting it west? It, as I say, it takes out one of the listed shop fronts.
It also puts the station entrance directly adjacent to the station, so it's much more legible from a sort of an urban design perspective. Although I may be straying perhaps into grounds that the architects might want to talk about. From a heritage perspective, having an entrance to a station next to the existing entrance to the station is is better than the proposal of having it down the street?
I don't think there's a great deal more to add. I think we've answered the question.
How about others who want to ask questions?
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. I mean, these heritage aspects, it's complex and important. So thank you very much indeed for raising these issues. Now, we're doing okay for time. In a moment, I'm going to ask Michael Gore and then Amanda Frame and Michael Bark of the Kensington Society, and I think that will probably conclude us. But Mr. Gore, now you represent the Pelham Street Residents Association, I think, is that right, sir?
No, that's yes, the Pelham Street Residents Association. So effectively the 11 buildings right opposite your building on Pelham Street, the proposed building.
Go ahead.
My question is really about the phasing of the building on Pelham Street. Clearly, one effect of the phasing is to take that building outside of the remit of what you've called the legal link with step-free access. But one of the other obvious effects is that the nighttime engineering works, the piling effectively, is also going to be two-phased. How much is the phasing of Pelham Street and the inclusion of Pelham Street in the first phase going to include the duration of piling work, considering both the work's going to happen in Pelham Street and on Thurlow Bridge, both of which are going to impact all the residents in the surrounding streets?
Jim Paul from DP9 here. I've got a feeling that there's going to be a technical construction response coming up in a few moments from Charles, probably linked to substation provision and the like. But so
maybe I can make it easier. Previously, he mentioned 6 to 9 months for the piling. If we're going to do it in two phases, is that 2 times 9 months?
Okay, I understand the point you're making, and I think that's probably the question he's going to answer. And the second and subsidiary but beneficial from a borough perspective, no doubt, is the fact that Pelham Street provides the affordable housing element within the development, which brings forward the affordable housing as part of phase 1, which is normally regarded as being a distinct planning advantage. But Charles, if you're still on the line, I wonder whether you could try and answer Michael's question.
I am. Thank you, Michael. Michael, sorry, I'm a little bit confused with the question. Do you want to put it to me again in terms of the actual specifics of it?
If you're going to include Pelham Street in phase 1 and Thurlow Bridge, or Thurlow Square as you like to call it, in phase 2, both of which require piling, and we've been over this in quite a lot of detail from the 2015 proposal. Presumably, if you're going to do them in 2 phases, we're going to have 2 phases of piling. So we're going to have nighttime work for 6 or 9 months whilst you do Pelham Street. And then when the second phase starts, we're going to have the same thing again for another 6 or 9 months over Thurlow Bridge. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, yeah. With the detail in terms of the piling of Pelham Street and Thurlow Square is that clearly it potentially could be done in 2 phases. It could be done in a single phase, so that we could undertake the Pelham Street works and the Pelham Street building first. And that obviously the importance of that Pelham Street building, I should just add, is that it contains the substation for the entire development. There is provision and possibility and scope to be able to undertake all of the piling works within one go for the complete deck. So that's a strong possibility. We could do that. Again, I can't come back to what I said before about the need to talk to RBKC and TfL about that and work with them closely to understand phasing and sequencing and timing, including kind of nighttime works, and also the ability to kind of obviously reduce noise when we do that. So that includes making sure that we undertake quieter construction and piling that we can if it is nighttime work. But again, like I said before, we will endeavour, working with TfL and RBKC, to do these works during the day. So it obviously reduces impact on neighbours in the surrounding area.
But I mean, what I would also add, sorry, Jim Poole here again, is that it's a very good question, and it's a takeaway for us, and it's one of the purposes of the exercises that we're going through today, to hear points like that, and come back to you with a considered response, and we will do that. Yeah,
if you could, it'd be very welcome, because obviously we're all deeply concerned by the period, by the amount of time we're going to have these nighttime works. Thank you.
Yeah, that's entirely understandable.
Good. Well, thank you very much indeed for raising that important point. Can I now move to ask Amanda Frame, Chairman of the Kensington Society. Amanda, would you like to ask a few questions?
I very much would. Thank you very much. We have some very important questions, and I have 2 questions, and Michael Bach has 2 questions. What I'd like to ask is if I ask my questions, and before we run out of time in answering those, that Michael Bach's questions could also be considered. So I'm going to ask Michael. Actually, before I give it to Michael, I'm going to state my questions, and then I'm going to mute, and Michael is going to state his. So we make sure, because we have 10 minutes to the end of the meeting, that we actually do cover our points. My first question is an environmental safety issue. Last week, the government introduced a consultation on revised building regulations for ventilation within homes. The requirement is to be met this year. So any building permitted and built must meet this now. All windows must be fully operable to mitigate overheating and allow for proper ventilation. RBKC's environmental report states that the existing local air quality in the vicinity of the development is poor, and that modeling indicates that there is a concentration of nitrogen oxide, most likely to be exceeded the annual means national objective. As there are 50 new residences, maybe 17 or so existing, but 50 new residents, which will have their rear elevation facing the rail lines, with most bedrooms on that elevation, how are you going to guarantee that the environment for both the air quality as well as the noise from the trains within these homes will be acceptable and safe? That's my first question. My second question is, Native Land has stated that they're going to enhance the retail and food beverage space for a range of retailers to meet the local needs. During the much important 2016 report leading up to it, much was done in terms of the review of the local needs of of the residents to meet their needs, as well as residents, as well as visitors. The RA, the Residents Associations, followed by TfL, produced an in-depth review of the retail needs. Have you considered that review, and what elements have you designed as enhancements to the retailers to meet the needs of the local people? I now turn to Michael Bach for Michael to ask his questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to pursue 2 of the issues that have, you will think, already been dealt with to try and bottom them out. The first one is verified views. I don't know whether you realise that the object of this is to help the planning committee understand and be able to assess what will be seen. And they believe photographs when they're presented, but the whole thing has got to be transparent as far as what it actually means. Last summer, you were asked to provide verified views at 50mm lens, which is in line with the Landscape Institute's guidance on visualization which says 50mm lenses is the default option. The latest report, all the images are dated at August 2019, and I think you've confirmed that these are all done by 24mm lenses. Why didn't you provide 50mm lens views here? Is it because your townscape consultant would actually have to review his report? The next item is about step-free access. Where is the money coming from? You say that money is going to be required from the development to provide the step-free. But we understand that any money achieved from this development cannot be ring-fenced by TfL specifically for South Kensington, let alone for the step-free access. We understand that South Kensington is not even in the top 20 for that funding. So how can the funds be guaranteed to be directed immediately for this redevelopment? And is there a contingency plan to fund the station improvement if TfL funding is not available? In other words, you're going to sign up to an agreement and we don't even know whether the funds are available. So you will understand that getting planning commission permission doesn't guarantee the development will happen. And it could even stop after your first phase. So what can one do if that is the case? We all want, if this scheme were to go ahead, for everything to be delivered, not to stop halfway through lack of money. So I hope you can answer those questions.
You have one more question, Michael. There is one more question I'm going to add. I'm sorry. There is a question about affordable housing. There's one more question about affordable housing that we need to add. That the affordable housing is noted as being 35%. RBKC's policy on affordable housing notes the 35% is to be 35% of the floor space. It appears that your 35% is of the unit numbers, not in line with RBKC's local plan requirements of CH2, which says that the square footage of the affordable space must be 35% of the total. And we would like to know if the 35% that you're quoting is actually 35% of the total.
Okay. Well, thank you, Amanda. If I can ask the applicant's team, perhaps we've got plenty of time for you to address all, I think it's actually 5 questions there. So perhaps if you could just go through them in turn, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Sure. We will we'll do our best to answer those very good and well-informed questions. In terms of the first point that Amanda raised, that was to do with the revision to building regulations and openable windows and bedrooms facing onto railway lines. And I wonder whether that might be for Tracy or Simon in terms of how one mitigates the impact in that regard.
Tracy, shall I pick that one up?
Happy to, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Amanda, for your question. Firstly, to say, obviously, it is it's a site which has challenges because we have the railway on that side, as you identified. The design, we've been very careful to be aware of noise and air quality. And within the report, there's within the application, SWECO have produced air quality impact assessments. Of course, we aim to have natural ventilation as much as possible, and windows are, where possible, operable, but that is also subject to TfL constraints, so people can't drop things on the tracks. And what I'd like to do is undertake to take away what you've raised in terms of any new building regulations, and we'd like to go and have a look at that and respond. So it's certainly a good point, and we're aware of the situation, and that's why SWECA have produced detailed reports on this matter.
Can I just add one further follow on to that, which is that we have done schemes in these kind of situations before where you have need for natural ventilation but restrictions on openings, and of course there are a number of mechanisms you can use, such as hit and miss ventilation panels, so solid panels adjacent to a fixed glazed window that enable you to get ventilation, and sometimes through filters, which reduces noise as well, without actually creating an opening and therefore a risk for stuff being dropped out. So there is technology and there are mechanisms whereby you can get ventilation without having an operable window as such, and of course we'll be looking at those too.
The new regulation actually addresses ventilation, but more importantly, it addresses mitigating overheating. After the summers we have had, we know how important it is to have operable windows. And the new legislation says operable windows. It doesn't say mitigated ventilation. So I look forward to seeing how you address this issue. Many of those bedrooms face that line, and many of those bedrooms will suffer from both the increase in the NO and as well as the noise. I don't want to really emphasize the noise, it's obvious, but we are very worried about the nitrous oxide increases, even as it's now already poor.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps we can move on to address the other points that were made.
Yeah, I think the next point that Amanda raised was in relation to retailing and responding to comments that have been made previously about local retailing and concerns of residents in that regard. And I wondered, Tracy or Simon, whether we've got a ground floor plan which shows the location and size of the retailing that we have in mind, because I think that might go some way to answer your question. Is that possible, Simon?
Yeah, I'm just finding that, Jim. Yeah. Oh, Tracy.
It should be up now, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a little bit difficult
Hang on, I'll zoom in.
Scale, but for those with good eyesight.
That a bit better?
It's a bit better, Tracy.
I'm doing my best here, Jim.
We believe that by providing, these are not big shops, and we believe by sticking to the principle of having smaller retail, it naturally lends itself to more independent retailers, more appropriate for the location. We know that came up previously. We know that you were concerned about takeaway outlets in the vicinity and the impact that they were having. That's not our intention. These are envisaged as what would have been known as A1 retail units before the use classes order was changed, but you still have the ability through the planning process to add those restrictions, and no doubt your planning officers will be thinking about that in advance of the planning committee. There's also, there's a wider curation process that our clients would be going through with regard to how one identifies suitable tenants for the retail. It's very difficult to tie that up through the planning process, in all honesty, but I see no harm in when that is available in sharing that with the residents groups to make clear what our client's intent is. There's no intention to remove partitions and turn into large units or open up basement areas in the manner that was suggested earlier. And once again, that can be controlled by through the planning process, should planning permission be granted. So I hope that offers you some comfort in that
Actually,
regard.
it doesn't, because planning permission cannot actually dictate the size of the units. You, as the property developer, can do that. And what we're asking is, first, have you reviewed the previous report on the local needs? And we know you haven't addressed it with us, because the last time we met with you was in June 2018. So we know that. But what we're looking for is some type of assurance that the type of occupancy in that line of shops, particularly on Thorough Street, does not necessarily reflect the line of the perspective that you show with High Street, actually Regent Street occupants.
Well,
that is not what we're looking for.
Well,
we're looking for some of our lost local services.
Well, I've offered to.
And that's okay. We can move on from there.
Well, I've offered to share with you the curation strategy, which, as and when that's available, we will do that.
We look forward to it, possibly before your application is decided.
Well, that sounds fine to me, and I would beg to differ on how one can control unit sizes through the planning process, and maybe you can take separate advice from your planning officers in that regard. But that's it. That's our intention anyway. So
could I just say that you do have landlord control, and since one of the parties to this application is going to be the landlord, we would like to see an undertaking with the proposed landlord, TfL, I assume, as to the mix. You may not be able to do it through planning, but you can do it through landlord control.
Yeah, Michael, Amanda, Michael, if I can just stop you there. No, I understand, these are important things, but I think you've raised the issue. Good. And I think the applicant team obviously will have heard.
You have, James. Thank you. Let's move on.
That's good. Now, I think if I could just ask, because we probably really only a few minutes left, if the applicant team could address the couple of questions that Michael Bach had, and also the point about affordable housing. Obviously, you can measure it by units and you can measure it by floor area. If we could just quickly, to conclude, if we could just address those points, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. I'll endeavour to do that. I think, and I think I can do it quickly. It may not be to the satisfaction of the questioner, but in terms of the verified viewpoints and the 50mm lens in particular, we have already covered that in this meeting. We hear you. We will respond. We're not seeking to avoid or misrepresent. We take advice from experts. We will take it away and we will respond, and we will do it promptly. With regard to your questions about funding, I mean, that falls entirely out of the arena of the planning regime, and I'm just not in a position to answer the point. It's a fair point, but it falls outside all matters associated with planning. With regard to affordable housing, the affordable housing numbers that we have given you are by habitable room. The policy within the Kensington-Chelsea plan refers to area. We have gone through, as you would have seen from the planning application, we've gone through a viability exercise independently checked by advisors to the council, which demonstrates that we are providing significantly in excess of the true viable position of this development. But that is a function of commitments that were made by Transport for London some time ago. So we're providing 17 affordable housing homes, 5 1-bed, 6 2-bed, 2 3-bed and 4 4-bed, all to the lowest London living rents for the borough. All of those are affordable to key worker salaries, and it's something we are completely committed to, and we hope that the area would welcome it.
But the answer is you're not following the CH2 requirement.
No, I'm sorry, I disagree. I think you need to go back to the policy. It's viability linked. We're providing in excess of what the policy accepts.
And could I just say, with regard to funding, we're talking about deliverability. And deliverability is very much a planning consideration.
I think maybe that's one for you to take up with the planning officers.
Well, we're saying it for everybody to hear.
Yeah, no, okay, that's understood. Thank you very much indeed, everyone, for coming along this evening, participating in this meeting. I've certainly found it extremely useful. I hope you have as well. So thank you very much indeed, and good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.